How's it going, guys? Cody back again, dropping yet another video. Right, guys, this time this particular prison in Scotland, right, which is a young offenders, it's also serves as a male prison as well for adults. Polmont, the death warehouse that it is. This is a sad and tragic story of a death from 2017. It's only just been reported on the 16th of September 2019. Because I've not been doing videos, that's why I haven't covered this yet. But here we go. Let's get into it. I'm just going to do my bit at the end, guys. Right, so this is a story on the BBC News website. Link in the description below, like I always do. Headline reads, Polmont inmate screaming for mental health support before death. A teenager was screaming for support with his mental health problems before his death in a young offenders institution, a court has heard. Liam Kerr was self-harming and attempted suicide at Polmont Young Offenders Institute near Falkirk in January of 2017. The 19-year-old from Paisley, Scotland, died in hospital less than a week later. A fatal accident inquiry heard that staff did not agree with his mental health reports, which said his previous behaviour was not psychotic. Mr. Kerr was in Polmont on remand over allegation that he robbed a sandwich shop in Paisley. The inquiry heard he'd been diagnosed on previous admissions as suffering from drug-induced psychosis and was said to have complex mental health needs. The teenager tried to take his own life only hours after being seen by an NHS psychiatrist who ruled out an immediate transfer to a psychiatric ward. Polmont warder Brian Ward, 48, said officers in the unit where Mr. Kerr was being held were totally disheartened by the feedback they got from mental health services. Shouting and incoherence. Mr. Ward told the inquiry at Falkirk Sheriff Court he was shouting all the time, throwing food all over his cell, saying that there were other people in his cell with him when they weren't. Screeching and shouting all night. He appeared to be speaking to his gran every day. He rubbed toothpaste all over his body and his head, was breaking into what appeared to be an Irish accent, and he was shouting incoherently. It was 24 hours a day that Liam was behaving that way. He added, he was seen by a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and the feedback were given that it was behavioural, not psychotic. We didn't agree with that. Myself and colleagues were totally disheartened with the feedback we got for him. We were trying to deal with the person, care for them, and all our experience went for nothing. Psychiatric nurse Brian Leach told the inquiry he had been on duty on the weekend before Mr. Kerr's attempted suicide when he was called to see him in the exercise yard. Mr. Leach said he was shouting, he wasn't making any real sense, and as far as I could see, he was pacing about the yard. He added he managed to settle the teenager down and return him to his cell, which was a mess. The next day he was sore again and found him shouting and screaming. Mr. Leach said he was placed on medication to help him sleep and arranged for the teenager to be seen by another nurse the next day. He said, I was thinking, if he gets a good night's sleep on Sunday night, maybe he'd be different on Monday. But apparently he wasn't. Not a suicide risk. Mr. Leach said he had not activated the Scottish Prison Service suicide prevention protocol, known as, at the time, Act to Care, as Mr. Kerr was not presenting any signs that he was a risk of self-harming or suicide. The following week, Mr. Leach said it was present when Mr. Kerr was seen by NHS Forth Valley consultant psychiatrist Dr. Rossa Serrano. He said, Liam was totally different from when I saw him at the weekend. He seemed a lot worse. He wasn't making any sense and you couldn't bring him back to talk to him rationally. It was understood that the psychiatrist's view was that Mr. Kerr's condition was deteriorating and he was placed on an antipsychotic medication. Mr. Leach said the view of the doctor, was that the hospitalisation, easy for me to say, hospitalisation, wasn't necessary at that point. Their plan was to see if the antipsychotic medication would work. The inquiry later heard from Mr. Kerr's brother Sean, who said he had been a lack of liaison about the teenager's history of mental illness. Vulnerable inmates. Mr. Kerr, 28, said Liam wasn't himself. The reports that he was screaming for support. There should have been an action plan, and I'm struggling to understand why there was no referral to the suicide prevention team. The inquiry before Sheriff Derek Livingston continues. Last year, Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf ordered an independent review of mental health services at Polmont. It followed the deaths of a series of teenagers, which sparked public and parliamentary demands for an overreaching probe into how vulnerable inmates are treated. Now, going back to the Scottish Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf, the reason he ordered an independent review of mental health services at Polmont is because the parents of a girl called Katie Allen, who I've covered on this channel, who was, I believe she was drink driving, or she hit somebody and made off from the scene. She was later jailed. Now, one thing about Liam Kerr's passing, God bless him, may he rest in peace. He was on remand for stealing sandwiches from a sandwich shop. Just put that into perspective. Week in, week out, there are paedophiles, right, with thousands of images of indecent images of children, fueling a demand for abuse to take place, harbouring these indecent images of children that go before the bench, before the courts, and are getting suspended sentences or sexual harm prevention orders. This young lad, 19 years old, who was severely mentally ill before he went to prison, was on remand for stealing sandwiches from a sandwich shop in Paisley in Scotland. Shouldn't have been in prison, in my opinion. Screaming out for mental health services, speaking incoherently, speaking with an Irish accent, speaking to his nana, had paranoid delusions there was people in his cell. Now, you've just got to look at the sheer amount of deaths in Polmont Young Offenders Institution. It's also an adult jail. It houses male, and I think it housed females as well for a time, because the only female prison in Scotland was closed or something. So that was that. Katie Allen died there. There's been a whole host, too many to mention, right, that have died in that prison in the same way. Now, like I say, the prison officers, have you seen the prison officers? Oh, no, we didn't agree with the psychologist and the psychiatrist saying that it was behavioural, it wasn't psychotic, right? Now, don't get it ever twisted for 1 second. Look at the sheer amount of deaths in that prison. The prison officers do not care, right? Mental health services within prisons are inadequate at best. They're shocking. The amount of mentally ill prisoners in the prison system, whether it's in England, Scotland, obviously Scotland's justice has been devolved. They look after their own prisons, right? The Scottish Prison Service and the Scottish Government, right? And members of Scottish Parliament. Here in the UK or England and Wales, we're covered by the Ministry of Justice. But the thing is, when you're putting mentally ill prisoners in prison, right, that are trying to attempt suicide a few hours after seeing a psychiatrist, seeing psychologists, seeing psychiatrists, right? Like I say, these are outside people that they have to bring in. They're not in the prison around the clock. You can't just say, oh, I fancy going and seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It takes time. Now, the prison officers are like, oh, no, we didn't agree. Every single person that saw his behaviour, right, should be done for corporate manslaughter. Will they? No. Because there's no accountability with prison deaths. The fatal accident inquiry, the FAI, it's the Scottish version of the prison and probation ombudsman we have here in England, who are again useless, corrupt, work with the prisons, get several steps ahead, drip feed information, get several steps ahead and drip feed information. Now, like I say, when you are jailing mentally ill people, right, and you're locked up against your will, right, it compounds your mental health. Really, really does. I've said it a million times. Most dangerous thing in prison isn't the drugs, isn't the understaffing, isn't the spies, isn't the bullying, isn't the violence. Most dangerous thing in prison, your own mind. You start to think, you start to dwell, you start to analyse, overthink. You start to think irrationally. You start to think of things that you wouldn't think of if you was on the out. Now, like I say, yes, a lot of people that go to prison have got mental illness, but when they're on the out, it's bad. But when they go to prison, it goes to a whole nother level. It's off the scale. And because mental health services within prisons are so insufficient and piss poor, let's say it for what it is, piss poor, what flows from that, suicidal thoughts, self-harm, suicide attempts, suicide. This is a man that was screaming for mental health support, for help, for services. And it was like the psychiatrist and psychologist were like, no, we don't have to place an hospital order on him straight away. No. He shouldn't be transferred straight away. In that instance, every second and every minute and every hour and every day is critical, whether that person is going to leave prison in a body bag or be sent to a psychiatric unit and get the proper one-on-one care that they need. But it's not there. And another man, 2.5 years on, left prison in a body bag. It breaks me heart, guys. Honest to God, like I can't. You've seen me on these videos. I get angry, I get annoyed, I get emotional. Right. This is a 19-year-old kid, right, that was in prison for stealing sandwiches, and what's the point in having mental health professionals if when they see a man they say, no, he's fine, it's behavioural, he's not psychotic? From what it says, it wasn't even placed on the suicide prevention thing like an app book, what we have here in England and Wales, right? It wasn't placed on it. When you go to prison, right, this is a man that clearly had mental health issues on the outside of prison. Now let's assume that his doctor, his GP, was very much aware of his mental health. When you go to prison, your mental health records, your health records do not follow you through the door to prison. They can ring up. If you tell them when you get processed, they can ring up your doctors and say, right, okay, yeah, we spoke to the surgery. They said, yeah, we can put him on this. He was on this, and this, right? But there's a lot of people that haven't been diagnosed with mental health issues and just throwing them in prison, right? In the name of rehabilitation, prisoners are leaving prison in body bags. People go to prison to better themselves, right? Well, that's not obviously what happens, but that's what the system would like to believe. People go to prison and they become rehabilitated. And sadly and tragically, the one way of reducing reoffending and reducing the prison population for a moment is for prison to leave prisoners to rot and to take action to take their own lives. And it's happening more frequently. And body bags are as much part of prison life as the spice, the drugs, the mobile phones, the understaffing, the violence, the bullying, the death, the misery, and the despair. Body bags are as much part of that. And it's the sad reality of prisons. But look at the history. Do me a favour. Come away from this video. Go onto go onto Google and just Google young offender, YOI Polmont or HMP Polmont, Polmont, and look at the sheer number prisoners, male, female, Katie Allen, male, young men leaving prison in body bags out of that prison in Falkirk. Shocking. And yet nothing changes. And it's not right, man. Every person, every prison officer, every prison nurse, every psychiatric nurse, every fucking psychologist and psychiatrist that saw this young man has got blood on their hands and should face corporate manslaughter charges. I genuinely do believe that. But the system wipes the system's arse, doesn't it? There'll never be justice. There'll never be accountability. And while that happens, people are going to continue to leave prisons in body bags in the name of rehabilitation. He wasn't even guilty of an offence. He was on remand for stealing from a sandwich shop. Not burglary, not aggravated burglary, stealing from a sandwich shop. Might have been homeless. Might have been trying to feed himself. Might have had an addiction problem. Trying to feed his habit. Goes to prison. On remand. Dead. Disgusting. Right, guys, I want to leave it there. God bless Liam Kerr. May you rest in peace. I hope your family are seeking some sort of legal advice 2 years on. The inquest takes so long because the sheer amount of deaths that they've got to cover, and also because they like to get several steps ahead, drip feed information to the family, get several steps ahead and drop information to the family. It's sad, but it's the truth. I'm going to leave it there, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Cody out.